Another area where we can kind of discuss like expectations that devs should have when they're establishing these relationships. So, like for example, when you're reaching out to journalists for the first time, should it be about serving the journalist or the media's context interests, or serving the game or the indie studio's interests? Like, what's a good way to approach it from who should I be serving here, me or the journalist?
Right, and that's like an invisible conversation that you're already having with them when you establish those relationships. So it's really weird to talk about out loud, I feel. But I think from my experience at least, it's very possible to frame it in a way where it quote unquote serves both of you.
Okay.
Because you don't want to seem like you have like an ulterior motive or something like that,
Right?
And you don't want to seem like you're kissing their ass, So a lot of emails that I respond to, they probably say something along the lines of, "Hey, maybe they'll say that they love reading your website or something like that." But the core of it is something like, we think coverage of our title would be a great fit for your website. And that's kind of finding a nice balance of like, is this for the outlet or is this for the developer? Because it's kind of framing that as symbiotic in a sense.
Okay.
It's mutually beneficial. Like, hey, and you're not saying this out loud, obviously, but you're helping us get attention and press by covering this for your website. But also, we're confident in our product that it'll be a good fit for your website and could like get you hits, Yep. So it's a trade-off, if you want to call it that, but for the most part, I don't think that these relationships should be one-sided in any way, Like it's again, it's symbiotic, Yeah. These are the pillars of game development, and they all kind of depend on each other.
Yeah, and wholeheartedly agree. I mean, that's actually an approach I'm familiar with and have done before, and always trying to take that approach is like being symbiotic. But I think what happens sometimes, though, it's not necessarily that people are going and thinking about, oh, it's all about me or whatever. It's more of they're just so excited and at the idea of, oh, we could get some coverage here. And it's like, hey, look. And then basically they're saying me.
Right.
But and then forgetting it's like, like we mentioned like we opened with is, there's objectives and things that media have to follow too. So going in with that symbiotic approach, like you said, is really probably the best way you can go about doing that. And then now, in terms of like really focusing on the relationship here, as we talk about symbiotic and everything, should indie devs only focus on establishing relationships with the media that serve their games audience, or are there benefits to having a network of other individuals that serve other audiences as well? And maybe to break that down a little bit further, like instead of reaching out to a journalist that says, hey, you like the scenario here, they cover a platform, whatever, and that's going to be a good fit for our game because it is a platform, and let's say it's a very specific type, and they write about that, whatever. But is it also worth trying to get coverage from other entities or other media that's really not talking about, let's say, a platform, a specific type of platform, just being more broad, I guess, with the audience?
Right. Yeah. And it's certainly worth try everyone at first. And I think you can kind of whittle that down in a way. So I kind of mentioned like the different categories of press outlets, and there are a lot of them that are, say, focused solely on Switch indies, for example.
Yep.
That would be like a really good one to access if if you have a Switch indie. And it's tough because, a lot of the larger outlets like the IGNs and the GameSpots and whatnot, it's kind of hard to find that nuance and kind of I'm trying to find a different word than targeting, but that's kind of what that is. Like maybe there could be like one person on staff who kind of champions like Switch indies, but that's kind of a harder game to play with. And then, but also trying to figure out which of these outlets will get your game, like will understand it. So, Uppercut, we're mostly like queer people of color. So if you have a visual novel that is focused on that demographic, you probably have a better chance of getting the attention of Uppercut than you are with IGN.
Yep.
Not to say you shouldn't not send an email to IGN, but at some point, if you are spending time and resources to try to reach out to everyone, I think that could be a little wasteful, I think.
Yeah.
And if you're confident in your product, word of mouth, like from the kind of starting from those smaller indie websites, like whether they're focused on a certain demographic or they're focused on a different platform, like you said, that can definitely amplify, especially with Reddit.
Yep.
Reddit and like all of these other aggregates. I can't name a single one right now because I don't really use them. But like the Nintendo Switch subreddit is really into Switch indies, and like that's a big source of like where people find that. And then if things are trending on Reddit, Polygon, Kotaku, whomever will probably pick up that story on their own. So it's kind of like this. It's kind of like this weird like cycle domino effect, Rube Goldberg machine, whatever the heck you want to call it. So kind of want to say that you should focus on that, on who you're targeting, who realize what your audience is and find the overlap of outlets that share those audiences, I think. And then hopefully the rest will work out from there.
Yeah. I'm totally with you there too. Cause I mean, like you said, hey, if you can put that email out to IGN, great. But at the same token, it might be if you're doing that to just every other broad, taking a very broad approach, it's not going to probably be as effective as something that is very specific to your game, especially if that media outlet is really catering to that audience as well too. So it goes back to having that symbiotic approach. And one thing that came to mind, because I remember talking to a dev a while ago, they were doing a game, I forgot the title of it, that was dealing with like a sinking ship and water was coming in, right? Where they posted something on Reddit, but it was to, I forget the technical name, but for people who are afraid of drowning or afraid of water or something like that. And they got a crazy awesome response, but it was very specific, but it was somewhat a little bit outside of the realm of just games as a whole. But they probably really knew their audience in the sense of, hey, most people on Reddit probably play games, right? And then so this audience, but they got a huge outcome from that. And I always thought that like their strategy and that was, or at least their reasoning for it was pretty effective. But again, it still goes back to being really focused and aligning with your audience and understanding them to the point where then like little things like that can probably pop up, and still to the point focusing on catering to not just your audience, but the audience of these media outlets as well. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So going on a little bit further, we talked about a lot like with establishing relationships and along those ends. But let's say like a studio or a team already has relationships with the media. Are there assumptions that people can make that may potentially tarnish those relationships?
Ooh, well, it can happen both ways.
Okay.
From what I've seen. I, on the end of like a press outreach person, I have received emails that have phrases like, I'm wondering why you haven't covered this yet. And it's like a second or third email or something like that. And then they go on, it's like, we've received accolades from all these people. And it's like, dude, are you saying that you're entitled to a news article from us or something like that? And some of it might be, I'm willing to give people some space, like for some developers, like they might, like English might not be their first language, and there might be different cultural and societal ways of communicating, or something was lost in translation or something like that.
Yep.
But that's not a great attitude. On the other hand, and again, I'm like resisting the urge to name names, but there was a case where, let's say, someone higher up at an outlet was contacting a public relations person for a large video game company, and being very presumptuous and saying like, oh yeah, and we'd love to be send us invites to all of your events and review copies and yada yada yada. And those were like kind of standard things to request, but the tone of it, I think, and the wording of it just came across wrong. And let's just say that big company does not have a relationship with that outlet to this day. So it can really go both ways. Like, just the base of it is just kind of a sense of entitlement. Like, you should be covering our game, or you should be letting us cover your game. Is, if I feel in my heart, is kind of a cardinal sin.
So don't do that.
Don't do that.
Basically don't make assumptions. And I think it's great how you open phrase it, though, is like, hey, it's still important to have some empathy, because, hey, if they're, English isn't their first language, or there's a cultural reason that they might say something a certain way, that's great. But at the same time, I'm sure too, like, you could probably figure those things out. But at the bottom line, it's like, don't feel entitled. Don't assume that someone should be covering your stuff. Just have a different approach and attitude about it when it comes to it, so you don't tarnish those relationships. And and this kind of pairs off of this a little bit too, but like, everybody's busy. So how important is it to keep this in mind when looking to develop relationships with the media?
This is one of the basic virtues we learn in elementary school, but just be patient.
Yep. The kids are still learning that one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, don't bombard press with emails and follow-ups. Like, I mean, I think like a kind of an unspoken rule is like, wait a week and then follow up. But this depends on who you are as a person. Like, some people skip emails, some people just kind of like scroll through all of them fleetingly. And, I try to at least look at the subject line of all of them. Okay. But if you didn't catch their attention the first time, they probably aren't going to from a follow-up. There have been some cases where like I missed an email, or I wasn't exactly interested in email, and then something comes up on social media and it's like, oh, okay, well, now I know how to find that person. So like, that's kind of like a best case scenario. But really, if you're an indie dev and someone's not biting, surely someone else will be happy to do so.
Yeah.
Like, someone will be happy to pick up on that story. There are several smaller websites. There's small news websites that are just happy to hear from someone, and like, they'll probably be happy to put out a news story, if it like helps them get views or helps a writer like fulfill a quota or something like that. So again, like, don't waste your time and resources if you just don't see that relationship happening.
Yeah. And you know what? I think what you said there is really good and aligns with what we were talking about before, where if, just sometimes if it's not working out, move on. And if you focus on those, like, let's say, smaller or more niche-based publications, they could in turn amplify your voice, where then that the timing might be better, or that other entity you were trying to reach out for that never followed up saw something later from